A grand jury in Northern Virginia has indicted former FBI Director James Comey on 2 charges, making false statements and obstruction of justice. Both are connected to his testimony before a 2020 Senate hearing. Now, in a video statement posted to social media, Comey asserted his innocence, saying he is not afraid.
My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial. And keep the faith.
And just this morning, current director of the FBI, Kash Patel, posted on social media dismissing claims that the indictment politicizes the Justice Department. Now, joining us are both CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. And first, I'm going to start with you, Caroline. Can you break down both of these counts and just how Comey's lawyers could argue against the accusations?
Yeah, he's ready for a trial. He's saying bring it on. The charges are very bare bones. It's just making a false statement to Congress and then obstruction of a proceeding based on that false statement. This has been investigated before. It has to do with testimony from 2017 that he gave regarding whether or not he actually authorized his deputy at the time, Andy McCabe, to release information to the Wall Street Journal. So it goes back a few layers. The wording really matters here. But I think first and foremost, Comey's lawyers will have a very good argument for selective prosecution. You hear, politicians and other people that are indicted try to make this argument for selective prosecution, and it almost never gets granted. But this is an almost textbook example of that. And you have, as exhibits to your motion, those Truth Social posts from Donald Trump before and after. You have the fact that he had to remove the sitting United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia and replace him with a crony, essentially, who was willing to indict this case.
Yeah, and Tom, I want to bring you in here because just how difficult is it to charge someone for lying to Congress in a case like this?
Well, it's one thing to charge someone with lying to Congress, and it's another thing to obtain a conviction for lying to Congress. And prosecutors will tell you that charging and convicting on perjury can be a tricky business. And that's because in order to prove a false statement or a perjury claim, you need to show that the defendant told an intentional falsehood, that it wasn't simply a lapse in memory, it wasn't simply a misstatement or a failure to recollect the events of the past, but they actually deliberately set out on a course to lie. So although it's one thing to charge, it's one thing to obtain a grand jury indictment, it is quite another thing to march into federal court, amass your evidence, and persuade a jury beyond a reasonable doubt, the highest standard known in American law, that the defendant is guilty.
That's a good point there. And Caroline, let's bring you back in because acting U.S. Attorney General Lindsey Hogan is the only prosecutor to sign the indictment. So what does that say about the case itself and also the statute of limitations that was supposed to end very soon in this case? What does that tell you?
Yeah, it says a lot. And as Tom knows, a prosecutor has an ethical obligation, not just when they want to bring an indictment if they feel that there's probable cause, because that's the lowest standard in our criminal law to get an indictment. You hear this phrase, you can indict a ham sandwich. But prosecutors not only have to believe that they can get an indictment, but they have to believe that the evidence is there to get a conviction at trial and maintain that conviction on appeal. And so the reporting is such that every other prosecutor that has looked at this case hasn't necessarily felt that they could meet that higher standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah. Maybe they felt like they could get an indictment, but again, there's that higher burden of proof that needs to be met in a trial, and it's a tricky business. The fact that she came in right at the last minute, she's been on the job since Monday, that statute of limitations was set to end in the 5-year mark there. I mean, it's all giving red flags for this prosecution.
And Tom, I think this is a very important question. What kind of lasting impact can the eventual decisions on these charges have?
I think the impact, regardless of way this case goes, will be profound. Obviously, people on all sides of the aisle have been concerned, both in the past administration and this administration, about the politicization of criminal law, about weaponization of the Justice Department. And I think this case really will be a bellwether of sorts. It's one thing, as I was saying, to bring an indictment, but now the real challenge starts in that now the Justice Department is going to have to come up with evidence supporting these charges. Evidence sufficient to persuade a jury that Comey is guilty. And so whichever way these goes, I think it will cause a lot of people either to reaffirm their faith in our justice system or to have serious doubts about the process that led to this point and that led to the indictment of last night.
Yeah, well said. Tom Dupree and Caroline Polisi, thank you so much to you both for joining us and for your insight. We really appreciate it.
CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roife is here with me in studio to digest all of this. Good morning. So these charges, as we talk about the bigger political climate, come as President Trump explicitly says publicly that the DOJ has, quote, has to act fast, end quote, in investigating his political opponents. How much does that come into play here?
Yeah, Errol, I mean, it's really hard to overemphasize at this point the gravity of this situation. American prosecutors, federal prosecutors, the DOJ is supposed to be an independent, apolitical body that's essential to preserve democratic values precisely for the reasons we see playing out right here. It's not just Comey, it's any person who dares to stand up to the president has to now fear that he can use this extremely powerful arm to come after them, and that is completely inconsistent with the rule of law and with democracy itself.
And President Trump has also targeted Letitia James, Adam Schiff, people who have investigated him specifically. What's also interesting is that acting U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan was the only prosecutor to sign the charging documents. How unusual is that, and how much does that tell us?
It is extremely unusual, and I mean, I think that the line prosecutors decided that there's evidence that the line prosecutors came forward and decided that this was too weak a case to bring, and it looks like then refused to go into the grand jury in protest, and that she had to, again, these are inferences that I'm making, that she had to go in there by herself. And I think it is also important to note that she herself has no background as a prosecutor, and so she doesn't. The norms and traditions of this office are what protect its apolitical status, and so she, as a political appointee and somebody handpicked by Trump, going in there tells us something. It sends a warning shot, really, across the Department of Justice itself, that if you, as a line prosecutor, decide that the facts and the law are not supporting this prosecution, somebody could come in from some person who is closer to President Trump and just bring those charges on their own. So I think that is a sign that this is a weak case, or at least that the line prosecutors decided it was a weak case.
The timing is also interesting. She's fresh on the job, and this was days before the statute of limitations ran out on the alleged crimes. Even if Comey is eventually cleared, though, what lasting impact might this have?
I think it has it will be hard to recover from this moment. I think that we have had, at time and again, at least since Watergate, every single attorney general and every single president has respected this line, this protected this line, the independence of federal prosecutors. And having breached that, I think it will take some time before we can go back.
Okay, we're going to watch this very closely. Rebecca, great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Nice seeing you too.
Breaking news, former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted. A U.S. official tells CBS News he's been charged with one count of making false statements and another count of obstruction of justice. We want to get right to Scott Frederickson, defense attorney and former federal prosecutor. So, Scott, what do these charges mean, and what specifically are they referring to?
Well, reports are that Mr. Comey has been charged by a grand jury sitting in Alexandria, Virginia, in the Eastern District of Virginia, with counts of making a false statement to the Senate investigating the Russiagate matter, and also one count of obstruction of justice.
So charges are one thing. How likely do you think this will end up in the hands of a jury?
Well, I think there's a legitimate, serious question whether this ever gets to a jury, given, the recent circumstances, which are just unavoidable. We had a very experienced veteran U.S. attorney appointed by President Trump, who determined there was insufficient evidence to indict Mr. Comey, and he was forced out. In his place is a new acting U.S. Attorney, Lindsay Halligan, who has a grand total of 0 prosecutorial experience, 0 experience in the criminal law. She comes to this job from her position as an aide to Mr. Trump. President Trump, as we know, demanded that Comey be indicted. So, yes, this is going to get to a judge, and whether it gets to a jury is a legitimate question.
Now, Trump has been putting pressure on Attorney General Pam Bondi to go after his enemies when it comes to these different types of charges. He also mentioned Senator Adam Schiff from California. I'm curious if you think that this is just the beginning.
It does appear that this is just the beginning, and that's a good observation on your part. Historically, this has never been done before. The White House has been walled off from the Department of Justice. We don't historically prosecute people based on political, retribution, revenge, or otherwise. So we may expect further indictments. The president wants Senator Schiff from California indicted, and wants Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, indicted, and it goes on. People who he perceives as his enemy. So this may be the first of more to come from this district.
I want to put up Pam Bondi's statement here she released just moments ago. She said, "No one is above the law. Today's indictment reflects this Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case." So, sir, do you believe the law is on her side?
Well, that's to be determined. I mean, that's a very general statement she makes. It's applicable to any case that gets indicted. No one is above the law. And, I think the concern, if I were in her shoes, is that if a judge on the motions in this case determines that this case was brought for political reasons without sufficient evidence, then there's potentially a very high price to be paid. And that will go all the way up to the Attorney General, as well as the Deputy Attorney General, as well as his acting U.S. Attorney. So, one thing we can look for initially in the presentation and the arraignment of Mr. Comey is who on behalf of the government steps up and is representing the government here, because apparently the experienced prosecutors in the office said there wasn't enough evidence. So, I understand what the Attorney General has said there. She's right. No one's above the law. But that also means if the prosecutors violate the law and bring a case that had no business being brought, then they're the ones that are going to be behind the 8 ball.
I just want to echo something that you brought up earlier in this interview, is that something like this is unprecedented, this type of case, a president putting pressure on an attorney general to go after people that he deems as his enemies. Can you go into that one more time, sir, and just how unusual this type of case is?
This goes to a fundamental building block of democracy, where the power to charge someone criminally in the United States is always exercised by professional prosecutors. The Department of Justice historically has taken pains to isolate itself, to wall off the President of the United States. So there's no political pressure ever exerted on the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, the line assistant U.S. attorneys to bring this case or not to bring a certain case. And it appears that wall has been fully breached. And based on reports, it appears that this new acting U.S. attorney, no experience as a prosecutor, is taking direction from the President of the United States. Never happened before.
What are you going to be looking for in the next couple of days with this?
Well, I think we're going to see some explosive, arguments right out of the box. And I think what I'm going to be looking for is when this gets to the judge who's appointed to handle this case in the Alexandria Division, I suspect we're going to see that judge exercise some very strong supervision, given the fact that the U.S. attorney in his district, who was an experienced prosecutor, respected prosecutor by the judges in that district, was forced out when apparently he concluded there wasn't enough evidence in this case. So The judges, this district is one of the premier districts in our country. They handle most of our national security criminal cases. They take great pride in their professionalism. So I'm looking to see what the judges here do. I think, I suspect, my prediction is we're going to see the government on defense, on its heels very quickly in this case.
Scott Frederickson, thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course.